We have children who were unable to walk, that because of the services we provided by helping them to get connected to physical therapy, they are walking. And I personally don't think that that's less than if they had, like, someone had snapped their fingers and said, God, heal you and walk. Like, they're still walking.
Welcome to Unlikely Gifts, a podcast for anyone looking for hope amid difficult circumstances. Life can be beautiful, unexpected, and at times profoundly difficult. It helps to hear from others who have grown from life's challenges and joys. That's why Leonard and Cynthia Bauer are sharing how their experiences working with families impacted by disabilities in Africa have taught them about life's most amazing gifts and its hardest tragedies. These are Unlikely Gifts.
Hello and welcome back to Unlikely Gifts. I'm Frank Boswell. I'm joined by Leonard and Cynthia Bauer, who are co-founders and directors of an organization called Kupenda for the Children. Kupenda is a Swahili word that means love, and Kupenda for the Children exists in order to replace harmful beliefs surrounding disability in order to improve lives. So welcome back. I hope both of you are doing well today. It's good to see you. You know, we've been talking about suffering, and that's a universal experience, and your ministry focuses on people with disabilities and then some other factors that can create some pretty intense suffering. I'd like to kind of flip the script a little bit. I'd like to talk about healing. And it's interesting to me from things you've said before. Apparently this comes up regularly as a topic in your dealing with people, or maybe I shouldn't be surprised, people that are suffering, seek relief and healing. But how does this issue come up in your work? Do people ask a lot of questions? How do you run into the issue of healing? Give me a general feel of this.
It is a common expectation among the people we work with, particularly the families of children with disabilities, that their children are supposed to be healed. And when they come to you, they have that big expectation. They may not come direct to say, will my child be healed? But at the back of their minds, that is what they are expecting. And the healing they have in mind is the physical healing. Will my child be able to walk? Will my child be able to eat on her own? Will my child be able to speak? These are the things that they are expecting, which are all healing. And yes, we come across so many of these parents with this expectation, but
what do they expect you to do?
Okay, they are not expecting you to be healing because they know you are not a doctor, you don't have that powers, but they expect your advice. Maybe you are going to tell them, go to such a place and your child will be healed. Do this and your child will be healed. So those are the expectations that you are going to direct them so that their child can be healed. Even if you give them money, maybe like for transport, they think wherever they are going, their child will be healed. Some even think that they are coming to see doctors when they are told, go to Kupenda. They think they are coming to see a doctor. So they are expecting you to do something to make sure that their child gets healed. But later only to learn that I am not in the doctor's office. The person I'm talking to is not a doctor. So it's like, oh, will my child get healed here? But all in all, what I have seen is when they come, sometimes they've not had even somebody from the community talking about the child's disability. So in the long run, you feel like, oh, this guy has time to talk about my child's disability. So it gives them some sort of relief as in discussing with them, which has never happened maybe in his or her community.
So how does this complicate Kupenda's ministry?
It's actually quite a focus of what we do. Well, first of all, there's different kinds of healing, right? And if you look at the definitions, but the kind of healing that Leonard's referring to, I think, is divine, miraculous healing. Even when they're seeing a doctor, they're expecting there to be like I think doctors are given a bit of divine views in that culture, right, Leonard? They expect that there's one pill and it'll magically make their autism go away or something like that. So pastors, traditional healers, and so on, for some of them, it's a money-making thing to say that you have the power to heal miraculously with divine, but I don't believe you can actually talk about disability and inclusion in low-income countries without addressing the subject of healing. It's one of the most important things because so many of the families that have come to us have said that they went to a pastor for healing, they went to a traditional healer for healing, and it didn't happen. And the pastor or the traditional healer sometimes will give a reason of why they weren't healed, that it wasn't their fault, like the pastor's fault. It was the family's fault for not having enough faith. And so then what would happen is these families who are already suffering, who are already dealing with really big challenges, it's being piled on them by the very people who should be helping them. They're saying, oh, but it's your fault. And there are some really terrible things that some pastors and traditional healers have done, like to say you can only be healed by this. Some of them will take advantage of the mothers in just horrible ways. Even for anyone who's dealt with a physical challenge, or especially when it comes to someone on the verge of death, like most people are going to have prayed for miraculous healing at some point in their life. But it's a matter of how do you do that, yet at the same time respond when it doesn't happen the way you want to. And so we've done a lot of research, and we talk about it when we do our workshops. We have one-day workshops where we talk to pastors, and we talk about the biblical stories on healing and not healing. And then we also talk with traditional healers. And the way Leonard talks to them, of course, with the traditional healers, we're not using the Bible, but we're saying, hey, have you ever seen this work for you? Like, it's not working in the way that you expect it to. And we also talk about there's different kinds of healing. It's not just a cure. I think that's how we often think of healing. It's some divine cure for something. And I think there's other kinds of healing.
So you exist in many ways to help people cope with and deal with their disabilities. But people are coming with an expectation and a hope, maybe a fantasy that somehow you'll make it all go away. So you have to manage those expectations. Am I saying that okay? Or is that too simplistic?
These expectations are there, as already we have said. When you work with these families for a long time, particularly on the intervention of their child's disability, it comes a time when these parents see a lot of progress within their children. And it is this progress that brings in that idea that, oh, so my child is able to do this. My child is able to do this. In the long run, they do not end up focusing on the physical healing. They now look at what the child is able to do. And also, by telling them the exact causes of disability, it's also a healing process because, as I've said, nobody has talked to him why this child has got this condition. So many people blamed her. But when you tell the parents about the real cause of the disability, and she understands it, then it's like it's a healing process because she's getting the truth about the cause. She's getting out from that idea of being blamed by the community that you are the cause of the child's disability. So in the long run, you find that this person who was very negative is now positive towards his own child. He's able to support his own child. He makes sure his child goes to school. He makes sure that his child is well dressed up and so on. So there is that change or that healing in his heart as far as the child with disability by the efforts you have put as an organization together with the parent and the family, and they are now seeing positive changes.
Well, and that's where healing is also how people think about healing connects to what people think of the cause of the disability, right? So if a lot of people, and we might have talked about this before, believe the cause of the disability was spiritual in nature, the intervention is going to be spiritual in nature. So when you start to talk about, there's actually a lot of other causes of disabilities outside of the spiritual realm. And so the treatment can be different. So I think that's where for us, and I also think personally, I think we always like to divide like divine intervention with like human intervention, but I don't know if we need to always be dividing that, because I do think like when we have children who are unable to walk, that because of the services we provided by helping them to get connected to physical therapy, they are walking. And I personally don't think that that's less than if they had like someone had snapped their fingers and said, God, heal you and walk. Like they're still walking. And it's still, I think, God's work.
I do too. What kinds of questions do they ask you? Did they ask you questions?
Yes, they do ask the questions. Like a parent may ask, will my child ever get healed? And here you are, knowing that this child has severe cerebral palsy, and according to this parent is thinking that will my child be able to walk on all the other things like any child? And this can be very, very challenging, even to us in the presence of the parent, because this is a very direct question: will my child be healed? And then you do not have the immediate answer. So you have now to look at a way that you are going to express yourself to the parent to be able to understand that we are not looking at one type of healing, which is the physical. But as I've said, it can be a bit tricky to the parent, to you as a counselor. But what I've seen is when you start talking, encouraging this parent and showing him the real causes, as I've said, and the potentials that the child has, if given an opportunity, you find this parent is leaving this place when she feels like, oh, so there is a hope. If my child can get therapy, my child can go to school, my child has a potential, and then she lives with that hope. And that should not be the end. There should be a continuous process of meeting this person again, talking to her, doing some follow-ups. And I think it is this continuous follow-up, continuous conversation with the parents. They become part of us. They become friends of the organization. In the long run, you see a parent testifying in front of other parents that at first, I really hated my child. I felt like, why do I have this child? But today, I'm seeing this child to be somebody who has a lot of potential.
And that, to me, is healing. The different kind. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned faith healers. I'm not sure what that means exactly. What are faith healers in a Kenyan context? And is there something in North America that would correspond to that, Cindy? From your
I'll say I think I probably mentioned it on other talks, but I experienced a little over almost 2 years ago now, a faith healer arrived at my brother's house when my niece was in her last days on this planet. And she was at the end battling cancer. And I think especially when we bring death into the equation and you're talking about the death of a child, we're all going to be asking for healing. We're going to be all asking for miraculous interventions. And you'll be willing to do things maybe you didn't think you would do. And this guy happened to show up and claimed he had the power to heal. But it was a really cold February day, and it was in the midst of COVID. So we were outside in the driveway talking to him and a friend of mine. And one of the things that was really challenging, is that the faith healers I've experienced and Leonard's experienced more than I have, they put the blame on the individual a lot for why it's not working. And so before he's like, well, and my brother had gone away, and he's like, well, before I do anything, I need to make sure we're all on the same page. And so he started asking me what my denominational background was. And when I said I'd grown up in the Baptist church and still do identify as a Baptist, not denomination, even though I've gone to different denominations, he kept calling me a Baptist later because apparently that wasn't the right answer. I think he was looking for something more charismatic. And it was interesting because I felt like I was having conversations with him like I've had with people here, except in this case, my family was the victim of it. And it was very difficult to hold my composure because he told me that all cancer comes from unresolved sin in the life of the family. And I responded saying, isn't that the reason for Jesus dying on the cross? Because we all have unresolved sin. That didn't really work for him. And I pointed out other things we've talked about in our workshops, like, Jesus healed from a distance because he was insisting he had to lay hands on my niece, which she did not want. And I said, Jesus healed people who had no faith at all. Like, so it's so many things like that, but it did. And I don't know if it was for him a power trip because I don't think he was making money off of it necessarily. So, and that's, to me, I think, yeah, it was like a taste of what I think people that I encounter in Kenya all the time. I think a lot of people in America I've known that are people of faith, especially when they get to the end, and it's like a death where they're dying. We'll see some of these people show up in North America. I've heard people share with me stories. Other people who the faith healers will say, well, it's because you don't have enough faith. That's why your mother's dying. You don't have enough faith, someone told me, because their mother was in a wheelchair. Only she had more faith, she wouldn't be in a wheelchair. So, Leonard, how does that compare?
That's very vivid, by the way.
Uh-huh.
Faith healing is something common among our religious leaders. And in our programs, we've been talking to them, particularly in our workshops, about the different types of healing in reference to the Bible. Some of them have really understood and we can observe a change. However, there is another emerging group in our communities, which is really against what we are doing, or because they believe in faith healing. And these were initially what we call soothsayers, but they came up in another form through the church. And these are the people who now believe that if your child is not healed, it's your mistake, you have less faith, it's your neighbor, it's your family person who is bewitching the child, it's a sin that you made sometimes back. And they always have a reason, a false reason, that will, to them, is the cause of that disability. And you'll find they'll even take a child who is hearing impaired and say, we are going to pray for you. You don't have to go to school for at least a month, and you are going to be cured. And the child and the family would be that pastor's home for 1 month, but still nothing comes out of it. But should that fail, they still go ahead and say it's because you have little faith. That is the cause of why your child is not getting cured. And this is cutting across in many, many places in our county where we work from. And this is because of the message that is being passed by this group of pastors who believe in faith healing and so on. They don't believe in taking your child to the hospital at all. Maybe the big churches, like the Catholic, the Anglicans, and so on, will believe in taking your child. Even if they pray for a child, they still advise you to take your child to the hospital. But with this group, they will never advise you. In fact, they will tell you, can you stop taking the medicines that you were given at the hospital? And that is how they behave. And I remember even they caused death to one of our staff, who was our first employee, who had been diagnosed with AIDS. She was under medication. But here a faith healer came across and said, if you want healing, stop taking the medication. And when this young lady stopped taking medication, she died.
I think that's the big thing that I don't think people realize is people are going for healing instead, like supernatural healing instead of medical intervention. Our thing is like I said, we're all gonna pray for healing, but do it at the hospital. Like also understand that God works through medicine and doctors and things, but they will go to the church or to the traditional healer instead of getting other kinds of medical care.
That strikes me as a very ancient enemy of Christian faith, Gnosticism, which downplays the physical and the material and diminishes it, in spite of Genesis 1 says it's all good. So, I mean, I don't think ultimately you can separate the spiritual and the physical. They're intertwined. We're physical souls. We're soulish bodies, is the way I've heard it put. But anyway, all that's to say, if somebody is saying stop taking your medicine or it's all your fault, then we're in error territory. And yeah, and then there's the whole idea that everybody should be healed, but these people don't have a 100% track record, and they can always dodge the bullet because they blame you, right?
Exactly. Well, also, one of the things we focus on when we're talking to the pastors in this biblical, when we ask people about healing in the Bible, they're going to give the healing stories of the Bible. I think there's like 42 or something like that, healing stories. You might know better than I do. But we say, okay, what about some stories of people with disabilities who were not healed? And our pastors someone in the group will always know about Mephibosheth, for example, who was the son of Jonathan, David's best friend, who had problems with his legs and was known to be like a cripple, is how they referred to him. And yet he was invited to be part of the king's table as he was at a time when people with disabilities were not even allowed to be in the temple. And so there's also Moses, who had a speech impediment, and there's some others that we're not sure what the disability was or was not. Obviously, Jesus talks about
the Apostle Paul's
the thorn. Yeah, that's what they think it could be. I've heard a lot of things about the thorn in Paul's side. Like, some people think it was a disability. Some people think it was like an ex-wife. I don't know. There's all kinds of things.
That's called reading into the text. Somebody,
depending on where the person is when they're in that. But I mean, obviously, Jesus talks about other parts of disabilities in general and the church's response, like in Luke 14, which we talk a lot about. But I think that so often, and we always talk like healing in the Bible. Why is healing talked about? If it was expected for everyone, why would we share the stories? Like, healings are rare.
Always been intrigued that Paul talks to Timothy about his stomach ailments. And he doesn't give him advice on getting faith healing or tell him he doesn't have enough faith. He says you need to drink a little wine, which is kind of interesting. So I don't know how you get around mystery. Some people are healed, some people aren't, and that was true in Jesus' time. And most epics in biblical history, there were miracles all the time. But do you all believe that God does heal, that there are miraculous healings from time to time? Do you ever see that in your work or run across instances of that?
I hear there's a lot of people I know. I even have an ex-fiance who was very into the idea of seeing healings, miraculous healings. For some reason, it's not been something I've needed in my life. I think when I was young, because I was born without my left hand, and when I was born, my dad actually wanted to take me to a faith healer. So far, in all my experiences and all the faith, I've never met someone who sprouted a limb. I've never seen someone that grew a hand. It'd be interesting. That's not one. There's a lot of leg lengthening and things. I don't think that is impossible, but I personally haven't experienced it in the realm of a divine, miraculous healing. I see healing all the time in our work, always. I see the most beautiful stories of acceptance and love and communities and like people who are then sharing their story and helping other people to heal. And to me, that's more beautiful than that one-time magical healing. Like I actually told someone once, and I'm like, if all of a sudden God sprouted a hand for me, I actually think it could be the worst thing that could happen for our work in Africa. Because wouldn't everyone just want the same and stop accepting themselves as who they are? I think that it would be a horrible thing, honestly, because I think that that's the challenge, right? I've seen movies, I've heard stories of people who are healed, and I think the challenge is how does that affect the people whom that doesn't happen? And that's where, like, I've wondered, even in the situation with my niece and my brother being a pastor, if that man, who I think whatever was happening there it was terrible. If somehow Ellie had what would be perceived as a miraculous healing, I wondered what direction my brother's ministry would take. And in the idea of it, I think that night was the night I knew Ellie wasn't going to be healed. because of what it would do. And you know, my brother, hopefully it's okay that I'm talking about this, but my brother, when my niece was in treatment, he was just reading the Bible, highlighting all the passages on healing, 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 healing. After she passed away, he had to get a new Bible. And he's like, I don't know why I didn't see it before, but the Bible is full of suffering. So it's different kinds of underlining, different kind of perspective, different way of ministering to people. And I think that the healing, I haven't really been able to come to grips with how does healing work for people, especially in places of influence, and how does that get perceived by the people for whom they're not healed? I know people that are not healed and wanted healing that still do and push towards miraculous divine healing. I just personally don't know how that fits. It would be interesting to see an actual divine miracle, but I don't know that I've seen it in the case of a cure. Have you seen something like that, Leonard? People are praying for Leonard all the time because of his cancer too.
Thank you. I think, as I've already said, it's a very difficult question, bearing in mind that I went through a process which I was expecting healing. As I've said, healing is expected by everybody who is here on earth when he has a problem or when he has a sickness. But I want to say I never expected a miraculous healing because a miraculous healing would mean not even taking any step, just to stay at home and say God will do everything. What I believed in was to put a lot of effort, go to the doctors, and I am sure the doctors, to me, are being given the wisdom by God to be able to help me get the healing. So I could see the doctors talk to me, give me words of encouragement. Even if when I'm so down, the doctors would always talk to me to make sure that I go through a very smooth treatment. And that is how I could say God was using them to heal me, because whatever they are using, medication they were using, that is something that they were given by God. I also want to say that healing can also come even to the people who are close to you. Let's say like your family members. When you are so down, you feel like what will happen the next day, and they are there to give you a word of encouragement. You see, you'll overcome this. I think that gives you that encouragement, that power to continue with the treatment. I remember when I was in the chemo room, and it's like, oh, wow, why do I go through all these things? And all of a sudden, I found myself shedding tears. But what happened? The nurse who was there and my wife came together, and they started talking to me, giving me a word of encouragement until I picked up, because I'm sure if I continued crying, it would have been very difficult for them to start the chemo treatment, because my pressure will have gone up and so many things will have changed my body. But they tried to talk to me until I found myself cooling down, and then the treatment started. And remember, this was the last treatment. So I think also when you have a family that is very supportive, a doctor who is supportive, and make other people who are supportive, it really helps. I remember one pastor who came to me when I was about to start chemo treatment, and he really said, I'm praying for you, Leonard, but from here, take an action and go to the hospital. And I still remember those words, and I remember the pastor, as opposed to other pastors who would have said, Leonard, you don't need to go for chemo, just let's pray and believe that God will heal you. So I do not really believe in that miraculous healing. I believe somebody has to take a step. Somebody has to move ahead and see, what is it that I need to do to help me get healed?
I feel like I've met people all over the world, in the United States and Africa, all over the place, but for some reason, they like need to see miraculous healings. That's like something they need. I've not actually had that need. Does that make sense? Like I've had people that I wish I've prayed, like I've made very specific detailed arguments with God for like, if you heal this person, if you heal my niece, let her live to 40, and none of these things, I won't ask for you for anything else in my entire life ever again if you let her live. But I think that I haven't needed to see a miraculous healing just for the sake of a miraculous healing. There are some people I know that just really want to see that. I haven't had that same need. I'm not sure why that is the case. Some people have you, I would imagine both of you might have met people that it's not just about the people in our lives that we love or for ourselves, but some people just need to know about miracles, like miraculous healings for their faith. And I don't feel like Leonard and I seem to not have that same drive for whatever reason.
It's tricky. I mean, Jesus pointed to his miracles as signs of who he was, but he was very, very, when people asked him for signs, when people were enamored with the spectacular, he would always downplay that. And then he would heal people and say, don't tell anybody. That's one of the most mysterious things to me of all. He'd be quite stern about it. Do not tell people. And nobody listened to him. They all went and told people anyway. So.
Well, and I would say, like, I don't think that they don't happen. I think that they do happen. I think that it's not something that we can predict when and who or how those things happen. I do still think those things happen. I just haven't felt the need to see them. I wouldn't say that. I know there are some beliefs, especially that, healing was for that time, that miraculous healing for Jesus's time when he was saying who he was, or sometimes those kinds of things happen when God is moving in a certain community. There might be more of those things happening at that time. But I don't know. I hear people, talking about stories of miraculous healing, and that's fine. I think they still do happen. I'm just saying I haven't personally witnessed it, nor have I felt like I needed that. Whereas other people, you know what I mean? There's a difference. I do recognize that it can happen, and people tell me these stories of it, but I haven't really, it's all my knowledge of it is like third hand. I think Leonard might have had more chance. Have you seen anyone who you would say was divinely healed, Leonard?
Not
Or you think they're all tricking you? Yeah.
You see, when you come across a pastor, they would always tell you stories of people who are healed miraculously. But again, we will never be told this is so and so. They just say, remember, I went to such a place, this is what happened. But something tangible may not be available. I'm not saying that healing is not something that can happen. It happens. But I really wonder how people are giving examples that may not be existing at all. I really don't know whether they are doing it just to convince people that they have the power to heal, and yet the healing should come from God. So basically, as at this age, I cannot say I have seen a human being who was sick and was healed miraculous. I don't remember. But you will hear these stories from so many people, pastors, and even they have influenced other people who are not who are believers to say, yes, there is miraculous healing, but I've never seen one.
Healing is such a tricky subject. One of the things that strikes me is it takes place on several levels from the things that you all are saying. It's physical, but it's also emotional and it's spiritual. And there's a communal dimension as well. Can you talk to that, the kinds of healing that you see take place in people's lives?
Yes, it's true. Healing is in different forms, and we have experienced these forms. One, we have seen children and parents or caregivers who have been under very serious emotional problems as a result of their children's disabilities. And we have seen them really go through a lot of situations, particularly from their neighborhood, that is their neighbors, whatever they say and all those words they use, just because this parent has a child with a disability. And the parent becomes so emotional because this is not his mistake, but it's like the community feels like this is the parent's mistake. And it pays the parent, it pays both the parents. But with our counseling and the frequent visits and even offering education to their children, you feel like that emotion that the parent used to have earlier goes down because he or she is seeing what the potentials that his child has. And with these achievements, then it's like, oh, I'm getting healed emotionally. Above all, even with our talking about the real causes of disability, it is also helping to heal these parents who have been blamed. You are the cause. You are the cause of the curse. You are the cause of this. All these blames, when given the real cause of the disability, you feel like a parent is getting some sort of healing. And there are a number of children who have parents who have gone through this. Again, this is also healing to the children themselves, because as the parents are going through this emotional, the child is also going through the same emotions. Why me? What did I do to God to have this? All these questions are making the child to have a lot of emotions. But what we have seen most is when these children are given an opportunity, let's say like accessing education, or being referred to a hospital where he or she gets medication, you feel like, so I can also make it. I can interact with other children. And that one gives him the emotional healing. I want to give an example of Steve. I believe Stephen had a lot of emotions at the beginning. So many things were being said, but when we came in, gave him the counseling, provided with him some of his basic needs, as well as accessing education. I believe if you see Steve today stand before the people and talking about his situation and being a very powerful advocate for people with disabilities, that is a sign that Steve has healed emotionally. Maybe Cindy can pick it from there.
Yeah, well, Stephen, maybe just to clarify, Stephen is paralyzed from the waist down. He fell from a coconut tree, and a lot of people in his community actually blamed his father and for his condition, saying that somehow it was a punishment or he was practicing witchcraft or something like that. But I think that Leonard touched on a good point there. In that part of the healing process too is that Stephen is an advocate himself now and is helping other people like him with disabilities. There's actually a picture he posted on Facebook the other day of another young man who was also paralyzed, and he's encouraging him to go to school as well, and that there is still hope even if you're not going to get up out of your wheelchair and walk, but he still can have a full life. And so I think there's some kind of healing in actually helping other people to accept themselves.
That's profound. I can't think of anything worse than just being rejected and blamed by community. We just don't live all by ourselves. And I keep thinking of that statement of Jesus, the truth sets you free. It really does. That's a very vivid portrayal of that. Well, Cindy, you shared a story with me about a young girl. I wondered if you would mind sharing that with the listeners.
Yeah, so quite a while ago now, I'm realizing I happened to be in Kenya. It also happened to be I was in Kenya when I was actually originally going to be getting married that week. I was engaged and I had broken off the engagement. And so I was going through, it wasn't the best time for me at that point. And, you start to question a lot of things when you go through big decisions like that. And I remember I happened to be in the office in Kenya when a woman came to the office who was a traditional healer and a birth attendant who had just delivered a baby who had been born with an arm like mine, missing her left hand. And she'd come not knowing that I was there, saying that this baby's mom wasn't coming out of her house because she was trying to figure out what she'd done wrong to have a baby born this way. And when I say done wrong, there's a couple different things to think about. So, for example, my mom, when I was born, wondered what she might have done wrong. Like, what did she not wear a lead vest when she was pregnant, when she went to the dentist and things like that. But in this case, we're talking about what did she do wrong? She was thinking more in a spiritual way, like, was she being punished for something? But she said, Yeah, not no, and so Leonard and our chairperson invited her to come back to the office. Her and her husband came and, talked to them. I remember feeling like I was putting on a little bit of like a circus show where I showed them that I could like tie my skirt and that kind of thing. And Leonard told the story to the mom about Kupenda and how it had started and how, if I had not been born without my left hand, if I had been born with both hands, who knows if Kupenda would have started, if it would have helped all the kids that it helped. And so the mom left saying, hey, not only can my daughter do things, but maybe she can actually help other people too. And I remember in that moment thinking, if everything I'd ever done only had ever led to this one particular child actually being able to have hope for her future, I felt like that might all be worth it. If it was even just that one kid, because and it also reminded me of my purpose and what we were doing with the work too in that moment. So even though I was there to, even though, in that moment I was encouraging that family and that little girl, I also was encouraged and she helped me because I had a bit of a healing from my own heartbreak at that time too. So, and then later on, I ended up, they didn't know if she'd be able to carry water on her head and all those other things that Kenyan girls do. So I ended up doing that. Um, and now that little girl, Joyce, I think what grade is she in now, Leonard? What class?
She could be now in class 5 or 6 there, class 6.
Yeah. I mean, originally they wanted to put her in a special school and we explained to her why that wasn't the best thing. And she's in a mainstream school. And last I heard, she was the top of her class and she climbs trees in the village and was one of the more accomplished kids. And so to even had a small part of that, it's healing for me. So I think that's the thing. When we can help other people, I think there's healing for ourselves as well.
Well, I think what's interesting, when I started out, I was thinking of healing in a more narrow way, especially miraculous healing and that sort of thing. It's interesting. There's a book Dallas Willard recommended, a book, Francis McNutt, who is a healer and Catholic healer. But one of the things he said in the book, he says the most important thing in healing is not healing, it's love, which was a really striking comment. Like 1 Corinthians 13, if I'm a clanging cymbal and all that, but I don't have love. And Kupenda is about love, and you both illustrated that beautifully. So I appreciate what you do, and I thank you for sharing that love with us today, and look forward to our next conversation where we will talk about the issue of grief. Thank you both very much. Stay well. Bye-bye. We hope this episode of An Unlikely Gift has been a source of hope to you as you walk through all of life's challenges and joys. If you'd like to be a part of the meaningful work Kupenda's doing, please visit our website at www.kupenda.org. Kupenda, Kupenda. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us next week as we explore the topic of grief.